This guy walked into the World Series of Poker with barely $10,000 to his name and walked out with a $1 million payday. And the crazy part is, he'd spent the night before getting high, drinking vodka, and barely getting any sleep. Yet when the cards hit the felt, nobody, and I mean nobody, could touch him. This wasn't luck. This guy had a brain wired like a supercomputer, calculating every hand, every bluff, every edge. And while others played it safe, he played it like a man who didn't know what fear meant. The results were 3 World Series of Poker main event titles, millions in winnings, and a reputation that made even the toughest pros sweat. But brilliance this wild often comes with a price tag, and very soon, you're going to meet the man behind it all. Let's roll back to September 8, 1953, in Lower East Side Manhattan. Back then, that neighborhood wasn't some hipster playing around with overpriced lattes as it is now. It was rough and unforgiving. And in the middle of it all, a kid was born. His name was Stuart Errol Ungar, but we won't call him a prodigy just yet. Because first, we need to set the table straight like his father did every night in the family bar. Stu's father, Isidore, ran what you might politely call a social club. In reality, it was a place where gin and rummy games played till the break of dawn, and where men with sharp suits put money on the line like it was nothing. Unlike most kids his age, young Stu didn't grow up with bedtime stories. He grew up with smoke-filled rooms, clinking glasses, and the language of risk humming in his ears. By 10 years old, yeah, 10, the kid wasn't playing with marbles or trading baseball cards like his friends. He was outsmarting grown men at gin rummy. Imagine being a full-grown adult with mortgage and all and losing to a kid who hadn't even hit puberty. That was Stu, and after winning his first real high-stakes match at that age, let's just say people stopped treating him like a boy and started treating him like a problem. But life has a twisted sense of timing, because in 1967, when the kid was roughly 14, his father died. Stu was still in high school, but education suddenly became a luxury the family couldn't afford. Bills had to be paid, mouths had to be fed. So technically, 10th grade was the end of his classroom days. So instead of textbooks, he picked up cards and never put them down again. Now, here's where it gets even more unbelievable. Stu's life went from 0 to 100 the moment Victor Romano walked into it. Romano was a man straight out of a gangster film reel. Everyone thought him a mentor of Stu's, but in reality, he was more than that. He was protection, influence, and a shortcut into the big leagues all in one smiling, deadly package. He taught Stu how to survive in rooms where losing didn't always mean chips. It could mean bones. Romano saw in him what only few could. A mind made for cards, numbers, and reading people like open books. So let's pause here. Imagine a kid from the streets of New York, with father gone, mother struggling, barely educated, and yet demolishing men twice his age in games where one mistake could cost you rent or worse. That was a terrifying genius. And yet, genius has a funny way of doubling as poison. And as for Stu Ungar, every win, every flash of brilliance pulled him deeper into a world that didn't forgive mistakes. Now, like Stu, have you ever had a childhood role that followed you into adulthood? Think about that and hit that subscribe while at it.
$1 of prize money. This is Kurt Gow.
By the late 1960s, New York already knew his name. Not in the way a school would brag about their mathlete or spelling bee champ, but in the way underground players muttered it under their breath like a warning. That Ungar kid will clean you out at gin rummy. Gin rummy wasn't just Stu's game. It had basically become his hunting ground, dismantling people as he kept winning, round after round. One of the most jaw-dropping stories was his match against Yankee Stein, a feared card shark in his own right. Rumor has it, Stu beat him 86 games to 0. Imagine sitting through that humiliation. 86 straight losses? I mean, come on, how is that even fair? And after that, Stein supposedly swore off ever playing Ungar again. And honestly, who wouldn't? By the early 1970s, Ungar wasn't just playing for lunch money or pocket change. His gin matches were for tens of thousands. Imagine this wiry kid, barely out of his teens, chain smoking, eyes locked in, and on the table lay $20,000, $30,000, sometimes more. And he'd treat it like a Tuesday afternoon pickup game without a sweat, just total domination.
But I was freaky. I go back to Bobby Fischer. I was freaky when I did. People would teach me a card game that I never played, and 2 days later I'd be better than them. And a card game they were playing for 30 years. But in terms of freaking nature.
But domination comes with its own curse, because no one wanted to play him anymore. According to the book One of a Kind, The Rise and Fall of Stewie the Kid Ungar, Stu ran through so many opponents in New York that nobody would risk playing him anymore. With no competition left and no money to win, he had to pack his bags and head south to Miami, a city that became his next hunting ground. Down there, the sunshine didn't matter. Stu was ready to live in card rooms as long as it was a healthy gin scene, with dozens of wealthy gamblers to prey on. Here's what made him scary. It wasn't sheer luck or chance. Stu had a photographic memory that could recall every card played, every discard, and every nuance of his opponent's habits. That, together with his reckless confidence, made him almost impossible to beat. He would stare across the table, taking one look at you until you felt like he was reading your soul. Now, this is the part where the story begins to bend. When you're too good at something, eventually the game itself stops being fun. Stu had reached that point with Gin-rummy. Beating people so badly wasn't satisfying anymore. It was boring. He needed a bigger challenge, and as fate would have it, he found it in two places: blackjack and eventually poker. In blackjack, Stu pulled the same trick. Casinos in Miami and Vegas started taking notice because there was this young guy strolling in, stacking chips, and walking out with piles of money. They caught on fast. Ungar was counting cards, and he was so sharp at it that most places eventually banned him from even touching the felt. Imagine being told, "Sorry, you're too good. You can't play here."
Okay.
That's how deadly his brain was. So, where do you go when the casinos kick you out and Gin-rummy offers no more challengers? Simple. You step into the lion's den of poker, and that's exactly what he did next. In 1977, Stu had just arrived in Las Vegas. But here's the catch. Poker wasn't just numbers and memory. It was psychology, risk, discipline, and the ability to survive swings that could break a man's spirit. And that's where things got really dangerous. Because unlike gin, poker could bleed you dry. And unlike blackjack, there were no pit bosses to ban you when you started winning too much. The game was wide open, and so were the temptations that came with it. Money, fame, drugs, women, and the whole neon circus of Vegas in the late 70s. Finally, Stu was stepping into something he couldn't just dominate with raw genius. Poker was the test that would either crown him king or destroy him totally. I kind of think it did both at the same time. But how? Stu stepped into poker like he was walking into a barbecue joint. Most guys take years to climb the ranks, but picture him strolling into the World Series of Poker main event in 1980, his very first time playing it, and strolling out with $365,000. Think about that. A 26-year-old kid, wiry frame, coke habit already forming, walks into Binion's Horseshoe Casino, sits across from legends like Doyle Brunson, and beats them. Doyle was already a two-time main event champion. Doyle was unsettled by the kid's uncanny ability to read people. Ungar pushed hands that others would have folded. Before Doyle could realize he was slowly being dissected, Ungar had outlasted him and the rest of the field, pocketing $365,000 and taking the main event crown. That win couldn't have been just luck. Stu played poker like a computer before computers even existed. Doyle later said he never saw anyone improve each day like he did. Stu didn't stop there. He came back in 1981 and did it again, winning $375,000 more in his pocket and another gold bracelet. Two main events back to back.
Stu Ungar has again won the World Championship of Poker 2 years in a row. What are the odds on that, winning it?
It's awful big.
Only Johnny Moss had done that before him. It cemented him as not just good, but scary good. By the time the 1980s rolled around, Ungar had won 3 Super Bowl of poker titles, collected bracelets like candy, 5 total across Hold'em and Deuce to 7 draw, and racked up lifetime tournament earnings around $3.6 million. That's not counting the money he won in cash games, which, if you talk to old Vegas regulars, was often just as much. But here's the thing. You couldn't separate Stu Ungar the genius from Stu Ungar the chaos. He'd show up to tournaments wired from all-night cocaine binges, sometimes so strung out he could barely sit still. And yet, once the cards were dealt, he would lock in. It was like a switch flipped in his brain. All that jittery energy funneled into laser focus. Opponents would see him shaking, sweating, and maybe even looking half dead. And then suddenly, he'd be cutting through the table. In spite of all his genius, Stu wasn't quite invincible. The same drive that made him brilliant also drove him straight into the wall. He blew through tournament winnings on drugs, horses, sports betting, you name it. He would win $1 million and then be broke in months. He borrowed, he hustled, and bled friends dry. People wanted him at their tables because he was electric, but no one wanted to trust him with money outside of it. Little did they know he would soon launch the comeback of comebacks and win a title that would turn him from legend into a god. By 1997, Stu was broke, addicted, and a ghost of his former self. He hadn't played serious poker in years. His health was wrecked. Most people thought he was finished, washed up, a tragic what could have been case. But poker is funny like that. It has a way of letting you write one last chapter. After getting the support of friends who staked him, Stu entered the 1997 World Series of Poker main event. And somehow, against a field stacked with killers, he found the old magic. For days, he cut through the competition with the same sick reads and the same fearless aggression. And then he won $1 million, his third World Series of Poker main event bracelet. Even hardened pros were shaking their heads in disbelief. Here was this man who had pawned away fortunes, who had practically drowned himself in cocaine, who had been written off as dead in the game, standing at the top again. World Poker Federation article titled his 1997 run as delivering one of poker's greatest comeback stories. The irony is, he dedicated that victory to his daughter, Stephanie, promising her a new life.
I want my daughter's picture one more time. I love you, honey, and I'll be seeing you soon.
And in that moment, you almost believed it. You wanted to believe it. The poker world celebrated him like a prodigal son returning home. But behind the applause, everyone knew the truth. Stu was his own worst enemy, and no trophy could change that. Ever seen someone rise while burning the house down? Well, you're about to witness one. For all of Stu Ungar's genius, the bill eventually came due. And like any casino marker, it didn't care how many bracelets he had. By the mid-1980s, his personal life was already wobbling. He'd married Madeline Wheeler in 1982, and for a while, it looked like maybe he had found some balance. Their daughter Stephanie was his pride and joy. But Ungar wasn't built for balance. His late-night gambling, the drugs, the unpredictable highs and crushing lows were beginning to wear her down. By 1986, the marriage was over, and Stephanie became the one anchor left in his life. The spiral was just as brutal financially. He would win 6 figures in the afternoon and lose it all at the track by sundown. Friends fronted him buy-ins, only to watch him torch the winnings. By the mid-1990s, the man who once carried stacks of cash like it was pocket change was nearly bankrupt. Stories floated around Vegas of Stu bumming money just to eat. And his health. God, his health. Years of cocaine abuse stripped him down to a shadow. By the late 90s, he weighed under 100 pounds. Doctors said his nose had collapsed from snorting too much powder. And yet, he never really quit. Like they say, every dog has its day. The eventual end for Stuart Errol Ungar came on November 22, 1998, when he was found in a cheap motel room off the Las Vegas Strip, flat on his back, dead at just 45 years old. The official cause was heart failure, the result of long-term drug abuse. When police checked his wallet, there was less than $1,000 inside. Think about that for a second. A man who had estimated winnings of over $30 million in his poker career died broke in a budget motel. The community's reaction was complicated. Pros like Doyle Brunson and Mike Sexton remembered him as maybe the most naturally gifted card player they'd ever seen. At the same time, there was heartbreak in every story told about him. And that's the cruelest irony. The guy who could recall every card, every tell, every angle at the table, couldn't find a way to save his own life. Of course, he conquered poker, clinched 3 World Series of Poker main event titles, 5 bracelets, and an aura of invincibility. But in the end, what conquered him wasn't another player or the cards. What conquered him were the demons he carried into every game. Let us know in the comments, do you think there was any chance Stu would ever have stopped doing drugs? Stu Ungar's story didn't end in that motel room. In some ways, that's where the legend really began. Because while his body gave out, his impact on poker only grew. Ungar changed the game forever. Before him, tournament poker was played cautiously. Tight play, careful bets, grind it out. Ungar tore that script in half. His life was fearless and suffocating. He pushed players with constant pressure, raising in spots nobody else dared. He read people like open books, spotting hesitation, fear, or overconfidence in a heartbeat. Today, when you watch modern pros like Phil Ivey, Daniel Negreanu, or Tom Dwan, players who thrive on reads and aggression, you're seeing Ungar's fingerprints all over the felt. But his legacy wasn't only strategy. Culturally, Ungar's downfall forced poker to look itself in the mirror. Here was a genius, maybe the greatest natural talent the game ever saw, destroyed by drugs, lack of discipline, and a lifestyle that made Vegas casinos look tame. After his death, the conversation around poker changed significantly. No longer was it enough to just memorize odds or bluff like a pro. Now players talked openly about sleep schedules, diets, exercise, and mental stamina. Because if Ungar proved anything, it's that raw brilliance can't save you if the rest of your life is in flames. That's why modern champions treat themselves like athletes. They study solvers, meditate before tournaments, hit the gym, and track their meals. Not because they're saints, but because they know what happens when the best of the best lets everything else collapse. Stu became the warning label. Play like him at the table, but never live like him off it. And then there's the romanticized, tragic genius you see at every game if you pay keen attention. It's the Mozart of their craft, the one too brilliant and too broken to last. In poker, that's Ungar. He was eventually inducted into the World Series of Poker Hall of Fame posthumously, proving that even in tragedy, his talent could never be ignored. If you enjoyed this story, you will probably love this video. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. And as always, thank you for watching.